The geometry of the vineyard had dissolved into nonsense. 10 minutes ago, the grapevines were parallel lines, a comforting grid of agriculture that made sense to Emma's eyes. Now, the California sun had dropped below the horizon, and the dusk smeared the rows into chaotic, bleeding shadows that refused to follow the rules of perspective. Emma pressed the power button on her phone for the third time. Nothing. The screen remained a glossy black void. Her itinerary, the PDF that told her where to be, when to eat, and how to exist, was locked away. The silence of the remote valley wasn't peaceful. It was a pressurized vacuum. Her chest tightened. The sensory input was all wrong. Then, the ground vibrated. A low, mechanical growl broke the organic quiet, and twin beams of yellow light sliced through the trellis, pinning her against the wood like a specimen. Emma needed a sequence. She needed raw data to process. She fixed her eyes on the nearest vine and started counting. 1, 2, 3. If she could just quantify the landscape, the rising static in her brain might settle down. 4, 5. But these weren't the neat industrial vines she had seen in documentaries. These were old, gnarled things, their trunks twisting like arthritic fingers, defying the straight lines she craved. 6. The bark was rough, peeling in asymmetrical strips that felt disorderly. 7. The count wasn't working. The numbers were just hollow sounds dropping into the humid air. The atmosphere itself felt like an antagonist. The air had cooled rapidly, settling heavy and thick against her skin, smelling of dry dust and the cloying sweetness of crushing grapes. It felt invasive. Her clothes, chosen for a climate-controlled office, suddenly felt abrasive. The seam of her blouse dug into her shoulder. The waistband of her slacks felt like a wire cutting into her soft tissue. She tugged at her collar, her breathing becoming a shallow, staccato rhythm. The schedule was broken. That was the core of the fracture. Check in at 5 p.m., unpack at 5:30, dinner at 6. It was now past 7. The deviation wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a structural failure. Her mind, usually a high-speed processor of patterns and logistics, was spinning its wheels. She was looping, the term her therapist used, the same error message flashing over and over. Wrong path, wrong time, no signal. She tried to visualize the map she had studied earlier, but the organic chaos of the twilight erased the grid. Every row looked identical, yet terrifyingly unique in its distortion. The ambient noise became a wall of sound. Crickets had started their evening chorus, a chaotic, high-pitched scraping that felt like sandpaper on her nerves. It was uneven, unpredictable. She covered her ears, but the sound vibrated through her palms. She closed her eyes, swaying slightly. The panic was a cold liquid filling her lungs, making the simple act of inhaling a manual labor. She wasn't just lost in a field. She was lost in the gap between her internal need for order and the external world's refusal to comply. She took a step back, her heel catching on a loose stone, and the loss of balance sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through her system. Then, the auditory landscape shifted. The erratic rustle of the wind was cut by something distinct, something engineered. A diesel engine. It was a rhythmic, consistent clatter. Chug, chug, chug. A machine. Machines followed rules. Machines didn't change their minds or hide in shadows. The sound grew louder, a steady, low-frequency beat that gave her something to latch onto. She focused entirely on that mechanical pulse, letting it drown out the organic chaos of the insects. The headlights swept over her again, blindingly bright, forcing her to shield her eyes with a trembling hand. The truck was a dark silhouette against the purple sky, a solid block of metal in a world of twisting wood. It didn't meander. It stopped 10 feet away, the engine idling with a heavy, reassuring vibration that she could feel in the soles of her shoes. The smell of exhaust mixed with the grapes, acrid, chemical, and grounding. The sudden cessation of motion was stark. The door opened with a metal-on-metal creak, followed by the heavy, decisive slam of it closing. That sound, the slam, was a period at the end of a run-on sentence. It halted her internal counting immediately. Footsteps approached. They weren't hesitant. Each step was a measured strike against the dry earth, a cadence of absolute certainty that contrasted with the frantic rhythm of Emma's heart. She curled her shoulders inward, a defensive posture perfected over years of navigating social friction. She began rehearsing the apology script. "I'm sorry, I took a wrong turn. I didn't mean to trespass." The script was a safety blanket against the angry landowner's shouting match she expected. She stared at the ground, focusing on the toe of a heavy work boot stopping inside her peripheral vision. The leather was scuffed, coated in a fine layer of vineyard dust. "You've gone quite a bit off the grid," the voice said. It wasn't a shout. It was a low, resonant timbre that seemed to vibrate in the space between them. And it was British. The accent was crisp, clipping the edges of the vowels with a precision that Emma's brain immediately latched onto. It didn't sound like the chaotic California dusk. It sounded like a well-ordered library. It cut through the humid air, cooling the panic in Emma's chest by a fraction of a degree. Emma forced herself to look up, though she aimed for the bridge of the woman's nose rather than her eyes, a trick she used to simulate eye contact without enduring the intensity of it. The woman was tall, leaning casually against the open door of the truck. She wore a canvas jacket that looked like it had weathered 1,000 storms, and her hair was pulled back, practical and severe. But her expression held no anger. There was no furrowed brow, no tightened jaw. She was simply observing, her gaze steady and unalarmed. My phone," Emma stammered, the words tumbling out in the wrong order. "The GPS failed. I was trying to find the guest house, but the rows, they all look the same." She hated how breathless she sounded, the logic of her explanation fraying. She braced for the reprimand, waiting for the lecture about property lines. The woman didn't move or cross her arms. She just tilted her head slightly, studying Emma's rigid posture, the white-knuckled grip she had on her dead phone, the way her chest was heaving with shallow, terrified breaths. "Breathe," the woman said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an instruction. The vines can be deceptive when the light goes. They like to play tricks on the eyes. Emma swallowed hard. "I'm lost," she whispered, the admission feeling like a defeat. "I am completely lost." The woman pushed off the truck door and took a step closer. She didn't invade Emma's personal space, but she occupied the area with a gravitational pull that demanded attention. The scent of her hit Emma then. Not perfume, but something elemental. Rain on hot asphalt, crushed sage, diesel. It was a sharp, clarifying smell. "No," the woman said, her voice dropping an octave, turning soft and heavy like a velvet curtain falling. "You're not lost, darling. You're found." The endearment should have felt patronizing, a dismissal. But from this woman, in this specific frequency, it felt like a coordinate. It was a pin dropping on a map. You are here. The word darling wrapped around Emma's nervous system and held it still. The woman didn't wait for a response. She didn't ask, "Are you okay?" An open-ended question that required Emma to formulate a report. Instead, she turned and walked around the front of the truck. "Passenger side is open," she called out over the hood. "Watch your step on the running board." A clear directive, a solvable problem. Emma's brain seized the instructions with gratitude. She moved toward the truck, her legs feeling less like jelly and more like functional limbs again. She pulled the heavy handle, and the door swung open with a solid weight. Climbing into the cab felt like entering a decompression chamber. The interior was worn, immaculate. No fast food wrappers, no clutter, just the smooth, cracked surface of the dashboard and a faint amber glow from the instrument panel. Emma sank into the leather seat. It was still warm, likely from the day's heat trapped inside, and it smelled intensely of cedar and that sharp sage scent layered over the mechanical odor of the engine. It was a complex, organized scent profile. It made sense. The driver's side door opened, and the woman slid behind the wheel. The space instantly shrank. She was broad-shouldered, filling the cab with that same quiet, heavy presence. She didn't look at Emma. She didn't demand conversation. She simply reached forward and turned the key. The engine roared to life beneath them. The vibration hummed through the floor mats, traveling up through the soles of Emma's shoes, shaking the static out of her bones. It was a constant rhythmic thrum, predictable, engineered, safe. For the first time in an hour, Emma exhaled. The truck moved with a heavy, deliberate grace, tires crunching over gravel that sounded like crushed bone beneath the chassis. Emma didn't look out the window. The landscape outside was still a blur of hostile shadows, a dataset she couldn't interpret. Instead, she fixed her gaze on the center console, specifically on the driver's right hand. It was a hand that told a story of labor. The skin was tanned a deep, permanent bronze, contrasting with the pale, scarred tissue of a thin line running across the knuckles, probably a slip of a pruning shear years ago. The fingernails were short, clean but unpolished, filed down to practical crescents. Emma watched the mechanics of the movement. The clutch depressed. The hand moved the stick shift down and to the right. The clutch released. It was a seamless transfer of energy. There was no grinding, no hesitation, just pure mechanical competence. Emma found herself syncing her breathing to the rhythm of the gear changes. Inhale on the acceleration, exhale on the shift. It was a new pattern, one that replaced the frantic counting of the vines. She appreciated the efficiency of it. There was no wasted motion in the woman's driving style. She didn't tap the wheel to music. She didn't fidget. She simply piloted the machine through the darkness with an ease that suggested she could drive these roads blindfolded. The silence in the cab stretched out, but it wasn't the suffocating vacuum of the vineyard. It was a weighted blanket. It felt thick and warm, charged with a static that made the hair on Emma's arms stand up. Not from fear, but from a sudden hyper-awareness of proximity. The cab was small. The woman's shoulder was only inches from Emma's own. Every time the truck navigated a rut in the dirt road, they swayed in unison, a forced choreography that sent a jolt of heat through Emma's side. "The rows can be deceptive at twilight," the woman said. Her voice didn't startle Emma this time. It rumbled through the seat back, a physical sensation as much as an auditory one. "The geometry changes. It's not your eyes failing you. It's the land moving." Emma blinked, the tightness in her chest loosening another notch. It was a validation. The woman wasn't offering pity. "Oh, you poor city girl." She was offering a fact. She was reclassifying the error. It wasn't a system failure in Emma's brain. It was an environmental variable. "I thought I was losing my mind," Emma admitted, her voice quiet, barely audible over the engine. "You were just looking for straight lines in a crooked world," the woman replied, shifting down as the truck began to climb a steep incline. "Nature doesn't do straight lines." The truck crested the hill, and the headlights washed over a structure that made Emma's heart slow to a restful pace. It was a converted stone barn, massive and rectangular. It was solid. It was symmetrical. The roofline was a perfect, sharp angle against the stars. The windows were evenly spaced, glowing with a warm amber light that promised containment. It looked enduring, a fortress of logic amidst the chaos of the vines. The truck came to a halt in front of the heavy oak door. The engine cut, and the sudden silence was ringing, but the vibration lingered in Emma's legs. The woman turned to her, the dashboard lights casting shadows across her cheekbones. "We're here," she stated. They exited the vehicle. The air was still cool and smelled of impending rain, but the stone house blocked the wind. The woman moved to the front door, unlocking it with a single fluid motion. She held it open, her body creating a frame that Emma had to pass through. Inside, the space was high-ceilinged and open, dominated by rough-hewn beams and a floor of polished concrete. It was minimalist, clean, and uncluttered. Emma's eyes scanned the room, cataloging the safety of it. "Shoes can stay on or come off," the woman said, closing the door and locking out the night. "There's water in the carafe on the island, or I'm opening a bottle of the 19 Syrah. And you can sit by the fire." She pointed to a leather armchair near the hearth. "Or by the window." She offered binary choices, A or B, this or that. No open-ended, make yourself at home. No vague, what do you need? She had effortlessly reduced the cognitive load, handing Emma a menu of manageable decisions. "Shoes off," Emma said, the decision coming instantly. "Syrah, by the fire." "Excellent choices," the woman murmured, turning toward the kitchen with that same mesmerizing, efficient stride. The kitchen was a revelation of stainless steel and dark granite, a space that felt less like a domestic heart and more like a high-end laboratory. Emma watched from the periphery, her socks silent on the polished concrete, fascinated by the way Millie inhabited the room. The winemaker didn't bustle. She didn't flutter. She moved with a calibrated economy of motion that Emma found hypnotic. Millie pulled a wine key from her pocket, the metal flashing briefly under the recessed lighting, and approached the bottle on the island with the focus of a surgeon. Emma leaned against the doorframe, the earlier panic receding into a dull ache behind her eyes. The visual noise of the vineyard had been replaced by this clean, stark symmetry. She needed to explain. The silence was comfortable, yes, but the logic of the previous hour was still unresolved in her mind, a hanging thread that needed to be snipped. "I wasn't just lost," Emma said, her voice sounding small in the cavernous room. She focused on the way Millie's thumb pressed against the foil cutter. "I was looping. That's what I call it. When the itinerary failed, my brain it got stuck, like a scratched record. I couldn't process the variable of the sunset because the schedule said I should be inside." She waited for the polite confusion, the awkward pause that usually followed her attempts to explain her neurotype to strangers. But Millie didn't pause. She twisted the corkscrew into the center of the cork with a single, fluid turn of her wrist, the torque visible in the flex of her forearm. "A feedback loop," Millie said, her British accent clipping the consonants. She didn't look up, her attention entirely on the extraction. "We see it in the tanks sometimes. The fermentation gets stuck. The yeast spins in circles, consuming energy but producing nothing. It's not broken, Emma. It's just stalling until the temperature changes." The analogy was perfect. It was data-driven, devoid of pity, and mechanically sound. Emma felt a flush of gratitude that was so intense it almost felt like heat. "Yes," she breathed. "Exactly." I stalled. "And now the temperature has changed," Millie said, the cork releasing with a soft, satisfying pop. She poured the wine. It wasn't a casual splash. It was a measured dose. The liquid was dark, opaque, swirling into the crystal with a viscosity that looked almost like ink. Millie swirled the glass once, agitating the surface, releasing the volatile compounds into the air. The scent hit Emma from 3 feet away. Dark cherries, wet earth, and that pervasive, grounding smell of cedar. "This is the 19, Millie said, sliding the glass across the cool granite island. It was a difficult year. High heat, early frost. The vines had to struggle. It makes the fruit dense. It's not a polite wine, darling. It tastes like iron and dirt and survival." The description was visceral. bypassing the flowery, abstract adjectives of a typical tasting menu and going straight for the gut. It appealed to Emma's desire for concrete reality. She stepped forward, drawn not just by the wine, but by the magnetic pull of Millie's authority. Emma reached for the stem of the glass, but she hesitated. Millie hadn't withdrawn her hand. Her fingers were still resting on the base of the glass, her palm flat against the cold stone. To take the wine, Emma would have to invade that personal territory. She looked down. Millie's hand was rough, the skin textured by work, contrasting with the sleek glass. Emma moved her hand forward, her fingertips brushing against Millie's knuckles as she grasped the stem. The contact was electric, a sudden input of warmth against her cold skin. It was a proximity check, a deliberate testing of boundaries. Millie didn't pull back. She held her ground, her blue eyes locking onto Emma's face, watching the reaction, gathering data on how Emma handled the intrusion of touch. For a moment, they were frozen there, connected by the glass and the friction of skin on skin. The kitchen felt hermetically sealed, a sanctuary of order and intent. Outside, the wind picked up, a sudden gust rattling the window panes with a chaotic, violent shudder. But inside, anchored by Millie's steady gaze and the heavy red wine, the world remained perfectly, beautifully still. Millie withdrew her hand, breaking the circuit, but the static charge remained in the air. "Drink," she instructed. Emma lifted the glass. Her instinct was to swirl, sniff, and categorize. Primary notes: blackberry. She took a sip, the liquid coating her tongue, and her brain immediately began accessing a database of adjectives. Tannic structure is medium plus. She was building a spreadsheet in her mind. "Stop," Millie said. The word was a soft impact. Emma froze, the wine still held in her mouth. She swallowed nervously, looking at Millie for correction. Had she done it wrong? Was there a protocol she had missed? "I can hear your gears grinding from here," Millie murmured, leaning her hip against the granite counter. She crossed her arms, the canvas jacket rustling, a rough, textured sound. "You're dissecting it. You're looking for the name of the grape, the region. You're trying to solve the wine." "That's how I know what it is," Emma defended, though her voice lacked conviction. "I categorize the data." "Forget the categories," Millie countered. Her voice dropped, becoming a low resonance that vibrated in Emma's chest. "Close your eyes." It was a command, direct, unambiguous. Emma hesitated for a fraction of a second. Closing her eyes meant removing her primary defense mechanism, her ability to scan for threats. But the authority in Millie's tone overrode the fear. She let her eyelids flutter shut. The visual data vanished, the gleam of the stainless steel, the blue of Millie's eyes. Now, there was only the hum of the refrigerator, the smell of the wine, and the sound of her own heartbeat. "Take another sip," Millie guided. Her voice seemed closer now, moving through the darkness. "Don't look for the flavor. Just feel the weight of it. Is it heavy? Does it drag across your tongue like velvet? Feel the temperature. Feel the burn at the back of your throat." Emma obeyed. Without the visual distraction, the tactile sensation exploded. The wine wasn't blackberry. It was weight. It was a heavy, cool satin sheet sliding over her palate. It was the physical sensation of grip, the tannins drying her gums with a friction that felt almost aggressive. It was texture. It was physics, not chemistry. "I feel the friction," Emma whispered, eyes still closed. "It's heavy, like a weighted blanket." "Good." Millie's voice was right there. "Keep focusing on that, just the feeling. Nothing else exists right now but the liquid and your skin." Emma stood there, blind and vulnerable, pouring her entire consciousness into the sensation. It was a relief. She didn't have to decode facial expressions or interpret social cues. She just had to feel. The singular focus was a narcotic. It quieted the noise in her head until there was only silence. "Open your eyes," Millie whispered. Emma's lashes lifted. Millie was standing directly in front of her, separated only by the narrow width of the wine glass. The proximity was startling. Emma could see the fine grain of Millie's skin, the flecks of silver in her iris, the pulse beating steadily at the base of her throat. She could smell the rain on Millie's clothes, a damp ozone scent that mixed with the warm musk of her skin. Millie wasn't looking at the wine. She was looking at Emma's face, studying her with an intensity that made her knees feel unstable. "The way you do that," Millie said, her voice rough, like the bark of the vines outside. "The way you shut out the world and pour yourself entirely into one single sensation. It's terrifyingly precise." She paused, her gaze dropping to Emma's lips, then back up. "It is rare, Emma, and it is incredibly attractive." The compliment hit Emma like a physical blow. Usually compliments were social traps, vague pleasantries that required a specific, coded response she often fumbled. But this was a specific observation of her internal process. Millie wasn't complimenting her appearance. She was complimenting her mind. I don't know the protocol for that response," Emma admitted, the truth slipping out before she could filter it. Millie's mouth quirked into a small, lopsided smile. It wasn't mocking, it was delighted. "There is no protocol here. You just accept it as data, valid data." Millie reached out, her hand hovering near Emma's elbow. She didn't make contact, but the heat radiating from her palm was palpable. "The fire is better for this," she said. "The kitchen is for analysis. The hearth is for feeling." She turned, and the movement created a vacuum that pulled Emma forward. It wasn't a physical force, but a magnetic one. Millie walked toward the living room, her boots heavy on the floor, and Emma followed, drawn into the orbit of this woman who made the chaotic world feel simple, structured, and safe. The living room was a study in controlled warmth. The fire didn't roar, it pulsed. Emma sat on the leather sofa, the material groaning softly under her weight, a sound of expensive, well-worn hide. She positioned herself in the corner, creating a physical boundary, a safe angle where she could observe the room without being flanked. Millie sat in the center, legs stretched out, boots crossed at the ankles. She was close enough that Emma could feel the radiant heat of her body, but far enough to respect the invisible perimeter Emma usually maintained. Emma fixed her eyes on the flames. Fire was chaotic, yes, but it was bound by the laws of combustion. Fuel, heat, oxygen. It made sense. It was a rhythmic flicker, a strobe light of orange and gold that allowed her to regulate her breathing. In, out. In, out. The panic from the vineyard was gone, replaced by a fatigue that felt heavy and sweet. "You're analyzing the combustion rates," Millie observed. Her voice was low, blending with the crackle of the wood. She held her wine glass loosely, resting it on her thigh. "I'm regulating," Emma corrected softly. She took a sip of the Syrah. It tasted of smoke now, mirroring the room. "I'm finding the pattern." "Is that what you do?" Millie asked. She turned her head, the firelight catching the sharp angle of her jaw. "You look for patterns in everything?" "It's the only way I can navigate," Emma admitted. The wine had loosened the tight knot in her chest, making the words flow easier. People are improvised jazz. They change tempo without warning. They change keys. I need sheet music. I need a metronome. And usually, by the time I figure out the rhythm of a conversation, everyone else has moved on to the next song. I miss the beat. Constantly." She looked down at her hands, gripping the stem of the glass. "It's exhausting. Being perpetually out of sync. It feels like watching a movie where the audio is delayed by half a second." The silence that followed wasn't empty. In the office, silence was a failure, a gap that had to be filled with small talk about weather or weekends. Here, Millie let the silence stretch. She let it sit between them, heavy and comfortable. "I detest jazz," Millie said finally. The admission was dry, amused. Emma looked up. Millie was watching her, eyes dark in the dim light. "I prefer the metronome, the polite noise of typical conversation, the how are yous and the fine thank yous. It's just static. It's data that means nothing. It's noise for the sake of noise." Millie leaned in, shifting her weight on the leather. The movement closed the distance between them by 6 inches. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop, the atmosphere thickening, becoming viscous. "I prefer this," Millie murmured. "Honesty. The raw data. Telling me you're lost. Telling me you're looping. That is a signal I can read. That is a frequency that cuts through the interference." Emma's breath hitched. Validation. It wasn't just acceptance, it was a preference. Millie wasn't tolerating her, she was selecting her. "I don't usually say these things," Emma whispered. "I usually mask. I pretend I hear the music." "Don't pretend," Millie commanded softly. "Not here. The Vineyard doesn't care if you're polite. And neither do I." The space between them was no longer just air. It was a magnetic field. The static charge from the truck was back, but stronger now, amplified by the heat of the fire and the darkness of the room. Emma felt a pull, a physical urge to lean forward, to close the gap completely. It was a terrifying variable. Attraction wasn't a pattern she could predict, it was a rogue wave. Millie's gaze dropped from Emma's eyes to her neck. Her expression shifted, becoming focused, analytical. She set her wine glass down on the heavy wooden coffee table with a soft clink. "Your collar," Millie said quietly. "It's twisted." It was a statement of fact, a deviation from symmetry, a problem to be solved. Emma's hand flew up automatically to fix it, but Millie was faster. "Allow me," she said. Millie reached out. Her hand moved slowly, telegraphing the intent so Emma wouldn't flinch. It was a trajectory Emma could track. The hand approached, fingers slightly curled. Millie's knuckles brushed against the sensitive skin of Emma's throat. Rough, warm, calloused. The sensation sent a shockwave down Emma's spine that had nothing to do with fear. Millie's fingers found the fabric of the silk blouse. She didn't just flip it, she smoothed it. She traced the line of the collar, her thumb pressing against the pulse point just below Emma's jaw. The touch was functional, correcting the geometry of the shirt, but the duration was intimate. It lingered. The correction was finished, but the hand didn't retreat. "Better," Millie whispered. Her eyes were locked on Emma's, dark and unreadable. Symmetry restored. She didn't pull away. Her hand stayed there, resting against the side of Emma's neck, a warm, heavy weight that anchored Emma to the cushion. The thumb moved, just a fraction of an inch, stroking the line of the jaw. It was a question asked in the language of touch. Is this input acceptable? Emma stopped breathing. The fire popped, a loud crack in the quiet room, but neither of them flinched. The world had narrowed down to the pressure of Millie's hand and the scent of sage and smoke. The geometry of the Vineyard had been chaos, but this was a perfect straight line, a direct connection. "Millie," Emma breathed, the name feeling foreign and necessary on her tongue. "Tell me if the signal is too strong," Millie murmured, her voice vibrating in the air between their lips. "Tell me if I'm moving too fast for your processing speed." "No," Emma managed, her voice trembling. "The speed is optimal." It was the truth. For the first time all day, Emma wasn't lagging behind the moment. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, held in place by a hand that knew exactly how to handle the vintage. Millie's thumb continued its slow, deliberate journey along the line of Emma's jaw. It wasn't a tentative exploration. It was a mapping. She was learning the topography of Emma's face with the same focused deliberation she used to test the soil in the vineyards. Usually, this kind of uninvited touch was an invasive species for Emma, a sudden, unpredictable variable that made her skin crawl with the urgent need to retreat. The polite hugs of acquaintances, the accidental brushes against strangers in crowded subways, they were static interference, irritating and loud. But this was a heavy, grounding pressure. It didn't tickle. It held. It felt like the weight of the lead apron at the dentist, a compression that signaled safety rather than threat. Emma realized with a sudden, sharp jolt that she didn't want to pull away. She wanted to lean in. She wanted to collapse the remaining distance and let this solid, immovable woman bear her weight. The realization was a breach of her own protocol. Millie's eyes searched Emma's, reading the micro-expressions, processing the data of Emma's dilated pupils and the flush rising on her neck. "Is this too much input?" Millie asked. The question was perfect. It wasn't emotional. It was logistical. It acknowledged Emma's sensory processing needs without judging them. It gave her an exit ramp that didn't require a clumsy social excuse. It was a binary query, yes or no, safe or unsafe. Emma shook her head, the movement rubbing her cheek against Millie's rough palm. "No," she whispered, the word barely escaping her throat. It's the only input I want right now. Everything else is just noise. This is the signal." Millie nodded, accepting the data. She didn't hesitate. She didn't do the awkward lean-in dance that Emma always miscalculated in past relationships. She simply shifted her hand to the back of Emma's neck, her fingers tangling in the hair at the base of her skull, and guided Emma forward. It was a command, executed with slow, hydraulic grace. When their lips met, it wasn't a collision. It was a docking. Millie took charge immediately, eliminating the guesswork. There was no question of angle or pressure. Millie set the parameters. The kiss was slow, deep, and devastatingly deliberate. It tasted of the dark, tannic Syrah and the wood smoke from the hearth. It tasted of authority. Emma's hands, usually fluttering with stims or clutching her phone for security, found purchase on the lapels of Millie's canvas jacket. The fabric was rough, durable, a stark contrast to the silk of her own blouse. Emma closed her eyes, and the world dissolved into pure sensation. The heat of the fire on her left side, the cool leather of the sofa beneath her, and the overwhelming, encompassing warmth of Millie everywhere else. Millie's other hand moved to Emma's waist, pulling her closer until their knees interlocked, a complex joint fitting together perfectly. The roughness of Millie's working hands against the soft skin of Emma's neck was a texture Emma wanted to memorize. It was abrasive in the best way, like the grip of a tire on a wet road. It provided traction. The kiss deepened, Millie tilting her head to access a deeper connection, a sultry, unflinching exploration that demanded a response. Emma opened her mouth, allowing the intrusion, surrendering the control she usually fought so hard to maintain. For once, she didn't have to think. She didn't have to calculate the duration or the intensity. Millie was the metronome, and Emma finally found the beat. The sheer relief of it made a sound escape her throat, a soft, involuntary hum of contentment that vibrated against Millie's lips. Millie pulled back, but only an inch. Just enough to breathe, not enough to break the connection. She rested her forehead against Emma's. Their breathing mixed in the small space between them, a synchronized rhythm of ragged inhales. Emma kept her eyes closed, afraid that if she opened them, the sensory overload of the room would return. But here, in this dark, close space, there was only the smell of sage and the steady, reassuring thrum of Millie's presence. "You're trembling," Millie murmured, her voice a low rumble against Emma's heated skin. "I'm recalibrating," Emma replied, her voice shaky but honest. The variable, it was significant. Good, Millie whispered, her thumb brushing over Emma's lower lip, claiming the space. I like being a significant variable. The silence returned, but the frequency had changed. It wasn't the charged, high-voltage static of before. It was a low, steady hum, like a generator running smoothly in the background. They remained on the leather sofa, limbs tangled in a configuration that defied Emma's usual strict rules about personal space. Usually, she needed a perimeter. She needed a demilitarized zone between her body and the rest of the world. But here, pressed against the solid warmth of Millie's side, the contact didn't feel like an invasion. It felt like structural reinforcement. Emma's hand found Millie's left palm, resting on her thigh. She didn't hold it romantically. She studied it. She ran her fingertips over the ridges of the calluses at the base of the fingers. They were hard, permanent formations of skin built up over years of friction against wood and wire. She traced the faint white line of the scar she had noticed in the truck. It was a map. It was a history book, written in dermal tissue. Pruning shears, Millie said softly, her voice vibrating through Emma's shoulder. Winter of 16. My hand slipped on a wet vine. It bled for an hour, but I finished the row. It's textured, Emma murmured, closing her eyes to focus on the tactile input. It feels like Braille. I can read the work. Most people find them rough, Millie admitted. They want soft hands. They want the winemaker in the brochure holding a glass, not the farmer in the mud. I don't like soft, Emma stated, opening her eyes to look at the fire, now settling into a bed of glowing, rhythmic coals. Soft is unpredictable. Soft hides things. This is honest. It's evidence. Millie shifted, turning her head to press a kiss to the temple of Emma's head. You have a way of stripping things down to their studs, don't you? You bypass the facade and look straight at the load-bearing walls. I don't know how to look at the facade, Emma said. I don't understand the decoration. I only see the structure. That's why you're here, Millie said. And the weight of the words made Emma look up. Millie's expression was open, the usual guarded authority softened by the firelight. I have a great deal of British reserve. I build walls. I curate distances. It's efficient. Usually people bounce off the surface. They get bored with the silence. But you didn't try to fill the silence. You analyzed it. Millie's hand moved from Emma's waist to cup her cheek, her thumb brushing the skin with a reverence that made Emma's breath hitch. Your way of seeing the world, in patterns, in details, in raw data, it isn't a deficit, Emma. It's a lens, a high-resolution lens. And I find it incredibly beautiful to be seen that clearly. The validation settled in Emma's chest, filling a hollow space she hadn't realized was there. She wasn't too much. She wasn't broken. She was just high resolution. So, Millie said, her voice shifting back to that practical low register. We have a logistical situation to resolve. Emma stiffened slightly, waiting for the rejection, the retraction. The storm is past, but the roads will be mud until morning. Driving is inadvisable. Millie paused, gauging the reaction. There is a guest room down the hall. It has fresh linens, a private bath, and complete solitude. She let the option hang in the air, a concrete variable. However, Millie continued, her gaze unflinching, my room is upstairs. The bed is larger, the view of the vineyard at sunrise is superior, and I am in it. A binary choice. Option A, solitude and safety. Option B, intimacy and the unknown. Emma ran the simulation. The guest room was the safe choice, the one that adhered to the original itinerary's demand for order. But the itinerary was already trash. The pattern had changed. And sitting here, anchored by Millie's weight, the idea of sleeping alone in a sterile room felt like a data error. It felt cold. The guest room seems inefficient, Emma whispered, her heart hammering a new rhythm against her ribs. If the goal is to maintain this temperature and this data stream... Millie smiled, a slow, sultry curve of her lips that signaled she understood the code perfectly. Then we should maximize efficiency, Millie finished for her. Come upstairs, darling. Let's look at the view. Emma stood up, her hand firmly in Millie's, and followed her toward the stairs. The old routine was gone. This was a new architecture, and for the first time, Emma wanted to live inside it. Morning arrived not as a gradient, but as a distinct shift in data. Light sliced through the gap in the heavy velvet curtains, hitting the floorboards at a precise 45-degree angle. Emma watched dust motes dancing in the shaft of gold. Brownian motion, random, yet contained. Usually, waking up in an unfamiliar environment triggered a cortisol spike, a system error demanding she locate the exit, her shoes, and her mask. She would normally be mentally rehearsing apologies or calculating exit strategies. But today, her resting heart rate was a steady 60 beats per minute. She lay still, cataloging the sensory inputs. The sheets were high thread count cotton, cool against her legs. The pillow smelled of cedar, sage, and the faint metallic tang of the vineyard soil. It was Millie's scent. It was a new baseline. Emma sat up. The room was empty, but it didn't feel abandoned. It felt managed. A glass of water sat on the nightstand, a thoughtful, hydration-based variable. Through the window, the vineyard was visible. In the harsh, clarifying light of morning, the terrifying, twisting shapes of the previous night were revealed as dormant vines planted in strict agricultural lines. The geometry had returned. The world made sense again. She dressed in yesterday's clothes, though the silk blouse felt different now, less like armor and more like utility wear. She followed the scent of dark roast coffee down the stairs. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the empty silence of loneliness. It was the functional silence of a machine at rest. Millie was in the kitchen. She stood at the granite island wearing a soft flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing those capable, scarred forearms. She was buttering toast with the same surgical focus she used to open wine. Edge to edge, even coverage, no wasted movement. "Good morning," Millie said, not turning around. She had tracked Emma's entrance by sound. "I assumed coffee based on the caffeine withdrawal headache you were likely developing. The pot is fresh." "Coffee," Emma confirmed, leaning against the doorframe, watching the rhythm of Millie's hands. "Black, no sugar." "Predictable," Millie murmured, turning with 2 mugs. She slid one across the granite. It stopped exactly 3 inches from Emma's hand. "Sleep?" "Uninterrupted," Emma answered, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. Data processing was suspended. It was optimal. I didn't loop. Millie took a sip of her tea, her blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good. Because the itinerary has changed." Emma stiffened instinctively at the word, but the panic didn't come. The variable was acceptable. "The rows are dry enough to walk," Millie said. "I thought I might show you the actual path. It's a loop, actually. 3 miles. Starts and ends right here. No getting lost this time." A loop, not a spiral. A circuit that returned to the source. Emma looked at the counter. Her phone was there, plugged into a charger Millie must have found. The screen was alive, glowing with a dozen missed notifications, calendar alerts, and frantic emails from the travel agency asking for her status. The old pattern was calling. The schedule was trying to reassert dominance with urgent red bubbles. It was just noise. Static. Emma looked at the phone, then at the open back door where the morning air was drifting in. She looked at Millie, who was waiting, not pushing, just holding the space. "The phone is fully charged," Emma observed. "It is," Millie agreed. "It can stay there," Emma said, turning her back on the screen. "I don't need the GPS if I'm with the guide." Millie's smile was slow and genuine. "Smart girl." Boots are by the door. They stood on the porch, the vineyard stretching out in a perfect, understandable grid under the sun. The symmetry was restorative. Emma realized that the error in her itinerary hadn't been a failure. It was a necessary deviation. She had to get lost in the chaos to find a variable worth keeping. "Ready?" Millie asked. "Ready," Emma replied. If you've ever found clarity in the unexpected, subscribe to follow the journey.